They said I would forget. They said time would smooth the edges. But every night, when the house exhales and the lights go thin, I can still hear the way the hallway remembers. I remember the first night like a photograph burned into wet paper, the pale rectangle of the hallway light, the wallpaper's faded roses like a crowd of watching mouths, the mirror that always seemed to reflect the wrong room. I remember the teddy. I was hardly awake, the kind of half-breathing sleep that makes the world feel like a memory you can crawl back into. I got up because something sounded like a dropped cup, a small, precise noise from down the corridor. My feet found the floorboards without thinking. They knew the map of this house better than I did. The air was colder than it should be, as if winter had leaked under the doors. The smell was the first thing that felt wrong. Not quite rot, not exactly perfume. A metallic, sweet tang that crawled under my tongue. It pulled me forward. The hallway was longer than it should have been. Shadows hung heavy against the wainscoting. In the muted rectangle of the far doorway, a shape moved. Slow, deliberate, as if testing each inch like a thing learning how its limbs worked. Beside it, closer to me than anything should be, stood a small boy in pajama bears, clutching a threadbare teddy that had once belonged to my son. He didn't belong there. His eyes were too round, reflecting the faint light like two coins. He looked at me the way an animal looks at a trap, not with fear, but with a curiosity that made my bones go hollow. And then I saw behind the boy, a figure crouched in the deeper dark, all angles and wet teeth, as if someone had carved a grin into bone and left it to grin on its own. It moved with the casual patience of something that has practiced patience for a very long time. The hand that rested on the boy's shoulder was wrong, long-fingered, not quite human. The knuckles knuckled in ways that made my eyes sting. My mouth wanted to call out, to demand names, to persuade it away with sound. But the sound that came from me was smaller, like a pocket of air escaping. The house tightened around that silence. The teddy in the boy's arms seemed ordinary until I noticed its face. One eye stitched wrong, a seam that ran like a mouthless smile. The boy rocked on his heels, as if listening to music only he could hear. I could feel my pulse in my throat, a staccato warning that my body was still trying to be useful. There was a softness to the scene that made it worse, an ordinary bedtime innocence threaded through something patient and hungry. I should have moved. I should have stepped back and slammed the door and woken someone else, but my legs betrayed me. The world sharpened to the quiet of breathing, the scrape of a shoe in the dark, and the knowledge that whatever had come into my house knew the difference between a child and his toys. I thought distance would help, rationality like a thin blanket, but the house has a way of making you small. Once I realized the thing was not a single moment, but a patient visitor, the air changed again. Thicker, as if the house were holding its breath to watch what I would do. The boy's head tilted, and he hummed a lullaby I had sung to my son the night before he left for his trip. It was the same melody, warped, the notes stretched like taffy until the tune sounded like a question. Something in my chest unhitched. The lullaby shouldn't have been known to that hallway. No one else could have heard me sing it. No one else knew that my son had preferred the bear's left ear chewed. The boy's lips moved and the words came out, but they weren't quite words, more like impressions of memory. Each syllable scraped at me, revealing small betrayals. The time I forgot a school play, the argument I had over a spilled cup, the night I stayed late at work and let my son sleep on the couch alone. The boy spoke those nights like evidence. With every line, the thing behind him leaned closer, smelling the air where my guilt lingered. I stepped forward because anger is sometimes louder than fear. The hallway swallowed my shoes. When my fingers brushed the boy's shoulder, the skin was not warm, but as cold and papery as old pages. The teddy's seam opened soundlessly, and for a moment I thought I saw a toothy mouth ripple along its stuffing. I pulled my hand back as if burned. The boy's eyes didn't follow my retreat. They kept looking past me, into a corner of the house only he could see. Then the walls began to speak. At first it was the familiar creak of settling wood, but under it, low and wet, there were voices echoing the house's old conversations. My mother yelling at the stove, laughter from a birthday lost to time, a voice that sounded like my son calling Dad when he was 6. They threaded through the plaster and pooled in the baseboards. The lights dimmed, and something tapped once, twice, like a metronome counting down. I tried the phone. Nothing. The bulb in my hand grew thick with condensation, though there was no rain. My throat tightened with a taste of pennies and wax. The boy tilted his head and smiled, and I saw, impossibly, my own mouth in him. For a horrible second, I understood. It was not just recreating a child. It was assembling me from the pieces I'd left behind. My regrets, my silences, my softer failures. It learned the map of my life because I had lived it, and it was patient enough to follow every corridor. Behind the grin of the thing, something large shifted. The floor under my feet shivered. The house folded a hair's breadth closer, narrowing the distance between me and whatever had been waiting all these years to turn my past into a doorway. I remember the moment the hallway stopped pretending it was only a place and became a mouth. Sound became a pressure, an ocean pressing at the edges of my skin. The thing behind the boy stepped forward, and the light from the far doorway breathed away. For the first time, I saw the boy as a hinge, not the boy himself, but the hinge between what I had been and what I had become. His small hand flexed on the teddy, and in that motion, the seam ran wider, like a key turning in a lock. I grabbed for him because there is a kind of primitive honesty in the reflex to save. My hands closed on cloth and fabric, gave way to something that should not have been there. Not cotton, but a thin, membranous skin stretched over empty shapes. The boy's head lolled toward me, and I could smell, distinct and intimate, every place in my life I had tried to hide. The beer from nights I called stress, the exhaust of arguments left unresolved, the floral soap my wife liked that I stopped buying after the fight. The house fed on those residues and grew articulate with them. The thing made no sound I could name. It exhaled like a furnace and leaned so close that the hairs along my arms read the story of its breath. I could feel its teeth behind its smile, the way you feel a memory you haven't yet had. It wanted a shape to hold, a voice to echo, something to wear when it walked out into the real world. It wanted me. I think of the choices we call cowardice and courage, and how much of both lived in that moment. I could have run, but the hallway had already stitched my routes into itself. It knew every place I would duck, every door I would slam. I ran instead toward the room where my son used to sleep, a small, useless flight that felt like prayer. The boy followed, silent as a photograph sliding into a drawer. The creature moved with the confidence of weather. In the doorway to his old room, the world fractured. Photographs on the wall peeled their faces like film. The air tasted like iron, and a lullaby reversed itself, sinking into the floorboards like spilled milk. My son's old blanket lay on the bed. It smelled like him, and like the night before a trip, lemon and cheap cologne and the faint chord of his adolescence. I grabbed it and wrapped it around my shoulders because grief loves a costume. When the thing reached the bed, it did not pounce. It did something worse. It stood and considered me as if it had been reading a book and finally come upon the footnote that explained everything. It whispered, not a word but a vibration through my teeth, and the house rearranged itself around that whisper. Pictures shifted to show faces I did not recognize. The calendar flipped to a date I had not yet lived. In that instant, I understood the bargain. It could become any absence I fed it. It could be my son, my brother, a memory of better nights. All it needed was permission. I closed my eyes because the world was too loud with possibility. When I opened them, the boy was gone. The teddy sat on the floor, ordinary and stupid and stitched wrong, its one eye glinting like a promise. The hallway was a hallway again, only longer by an inch and colder by a degree. My phone lay on the bed with a single missed call from a number I did not know. I learned then how certain things survive you, not the photo albums, but the questions you leave unanswered. I left the house that night, carrying a blanket, and the taste of metal and a new, precise knowledge that some doors are not opened so much as invited to stay. It is still here.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.